This episode was recorded a few days before the U.S. Treasury Department proposed sweeping new rules that looks to extend anti-money laundering regulations to include transactions from VASP to non-custodial wallets. We hope to touch more on that regulation specifically in an upcoming show. This week on Monero Talk is sponsored by Cake Wallet. Store, send, receive, and exchange your Monero safely on your iOS and Android too. Cake Wallet is open source, and you always control your own keys and seed. And by xmr.to. Anonymously exchange your Monero into Bitcoin and seamlessly send Monero to any Bitcoin address. Go to xmr.to or use it right in your Cake Wallet. Cake Wallet and xmr.to are trusted and verified by the Monero community. Monero Talk is also made possible from contributions by viewers and listeners like you. This week on Monero Talk, Douglas Tuman interviews Justin Ehrenhofer and Robby Dermody on the launch of Comply First, an initiative that focuses on providing compliance guidance and resources around privacy-preserving cryptocurrencies. Douglas, Justin, and Robby discuss how Comply First is an open-source movement that is set to be a resource for people that want to comply with regulations by giving them the tools that they need to navigate in this area for all cryptocurrencies, not just Monero. They aim to accurately reflect a good intersection between regulators and policing in the United States, as well as exchanges and services, by teaching them how to best support these privacy-preserving cryptocurrencies instead of ignoring them. They also chat about what the vision of the company is, if there is a difference between regulating privacy coins versus transparent ones, and what the hesitation is for most exchanges to add Monero when the lack of privacy has become a relevant and important factor in Bitcoin. Monero Talk starts now.
All right, Justin, Robby, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, sure.
I'm getting back in the swing of things here over at Monero Talk. I was absent a little bit with the run for Congress. It's nice to be back. And it seems like since I've been gone, or when I was paying a little bit less attention there, it seems like regulation was really what has become at the forefront of the community here. Talk about privacy coins in general and regulation and what exchanges are doing and whether or not exchanges can even safely or add privacy coins to add privacy coins. And I know Perkins Coie was the one that did the
white Perkins Coie, yeah, they did the white.
Perkins Coie recently put out a white paper, basically going into detail as to whether or not exchanges should feel like there is a means to working with privacy coins, and that seemed like very good news. And you guys recently, I believe it's you guys, or I don't know, you could tell me, started Comply First. And my understanding is that association is there to, once again, assist with things like exchanges and other people working in the industry in basically navigating the current regulation scene. So allowing privacy coins to be added to things like exchanges. So I wanted to talk about Comply First today, and I guess so. My first question would be: what is Comply First, and who's behind it and who's involved?
Justin, do you want to take the?
Sure. So first, Doug, the biggest change since you've been gone is I have glasses now. Okay, so that's you missed that one. However, beyond that, on Comply First,
through all those regulations, all that small text.
Indeed. No, the biggest change, or sorry, beyond my glasses, so still stuck on that. Comply First was created as an industry initiative. It is certainly not exclusive to Monero. It represents the views of many people in the Monero community, but it absolutely is not solely a Monero initiative. It came about because we noticed that a lot of exchanges were being very hesitant with regards to privacy preserving cryptocurrencies. They were more likely to say, okay, well, these are higher risk. And in order to signal to their banking partners or to regulators that they were, taking compliance seriously, which is understandable from their perspective, they were not putting in a substantial amount of effort into learning about these technologies. However, that's not really an option for them anymore because people are increasingly using privacy preserving tools on things like Bitcoin, right? More and more people are using decentralized mixers like Samurai or Wasabi wallets on Bitcoin. So these people, like, the exchanges can't really ignore the problems anymore. So, the Perkins-Coie white paper was one part of the regulatory efforts. Perkins-Coie put out a white paper based off, interest in privacy-preserving cryptocurrencies, stating that, in their opinion, it was possible to design a compliance program to support privacy-preserving cryptocurrencies. And although that received a lot of positive feedback, we nevertheless got a lot of feedback from people saying, this is very much like a high-level white paper. And even though it says, things are possible to be implemented, we still don't have a very obvious method to actually implement, these policies and procedures for many cryptocurrencies. And exchanges still to this point are hesitant to take that first step. So Comply First is just an initiative of several different cryptocurrency exchanges, OTC desks, wallet providers. Again, certainly not Monero exclusive. And we came to the table and discussed, what are the reasonable paths forward? And then instead of one institution coming out and putting out what they believe is a reasonable compliance tool, instead it's a industry effort. And so we put out actual compliance resources that people can use specifically for Monero and other cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin, in order to better prepare the exchanges for handling privacy enhanced situations on Bitcoin and handling privacy preserving cases on every other coin where it's relevant. And so we hope that this really took it to the next step where instead of just talking about how, it is possible, it's something we can do. You can do this, but we aren't them. So what we did is, we talked to exchanges, saw what people wanted to do, and then came together that something that, in our opinion, and based off the feedback we've received, we are very confident in saying that it very accurately reflects a good intersection between regulators, and at least in the United States, and also, exchanges and other services to best support these cryptocurrencies, rather than just saying, well, we don't know how to do it. Here's how to do it. So there you go.
So Comply First is really just that. It's a resource for people that want to comply with regulations and giving them the tools that they need, I guess, to start to navigate this area.
Yeah, I think there's some additional things to it as well. I mean, I think part of your initial question was how it came about or how it's organized. It's actually been in the works for a while. I believe it was 2018, and I think it was Naveen over at Tari and myself. We were having a conversation, and it just seemed the perception of, for instance, Monero with the larger crypto community and with exchanges, and kind of what we knew as the reality of that compliance was possible. There was quite a mismatch, and it was just kind of like, well, why don't we start putting something together and start collaborating with a law firm, which ended up being Perkins-Coie, kind of collaborate together to they worked on that white paper, and then just like Justin mentioned, I think during that process, a lot of people came together. So it is really kind of like an open source movement. There's a lot of people that I know. Atari worked with us and has done a ton on this, and Justin's put a ton of work in. I've done some as well, and we've had several other people that have really stepped up to a place and helped to put these resources together. But I think another what I see as kind of a secondary mission is, it's funny, like with Bitcoin, it's kind of a technical quirk that it's as transparent as it is. I think when Bitcoin was released and being put together, kind of the cryptography for private transactions either wasn't around, or it was maybe not mature, robust, and developed enough to be considered by Satoshi, or he didn't know enough about it, whatever the case was. So I think that was released, and it just kind of, in a way, it was, you may say could have been a blessing in some regards, because it allowed, I think, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies being such a new and novel thing at the time, it allowed kind of the larger world to get comfortable with these things and allowed them to grab a foothold, being versus them trying to choke it off early. But at the same time, it also got people like regulators, like people in finance, kind of comfortable with the idea that cryptocurrencies are all about making everyone's transactions public and publicly viewable. So there's this idea that's somehow normal. And, as we've seen with all these privacy abuses, all the, for instance, you search on your name on Google, for instance, and you find this company wants to sell your address and phone number, and this one does, and that one does. And I underwent the effort of trying to get that off of Google, and you have to pay some third-party company money or spend a ton of time doing it. So privacy in general, and financial privacy as well, is just quite a big topic, I think, moving forward. So I think, and also, so part of the Comply First mission is really on the perception side, is to help correct the perception that it's somehow weird to be using these privacy preserving cryptocurrencies. That if, like, on the fact that if I have a Bitcoin address, and say I have 5 Bitcoin on there, and I pay some guy $200 worth of Bitcoin for some service he performed for me, or a product, it would just make sense naturally, given the nature of Bitcoin, to either basically send it to an exchange first and send it back to a new address and send it to him from that, or to use a mixer or something like that, just so he doesn't see that I have 5 Bitcoin and everyone else doesn't see that as well. And so, but that's somehow can be looked at as kind of a weird thing. So part of it is working to help to correct that perception that, not only can exchanges carry these things, but these privacy preserving cryptos are here to stay. And it's not a weird thing. Privacy is a value that I think is everyone should value privacy, especially kind of in this era of this oncoming dragnet surveillance and things we see out of places like China. It is a really fundamental right that people have.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, everything that's good. So, I mean, if you talk to Joe Schmo on the street, that's whether they've heard of Bitcoin or not, most people have at this point. The Joe Schmoes of the world still think, Bitcoin is anonymous, and they think that's inherent in this technology. Then, you talk to the people that obviously know crypto, and the banks, and now these larger companies, financial companies that are getting interested in it or have already stepped into it. And they seem to be obviously well aware of the fact that Bitcoin is transparent, and seemingly excited about that. That seems to be becoming part of the value proposition of what Bitcoin is. And, it's being talked about as, that's part of what this next bull run in Bitcoin is, now big money can get in, and they know that, Bitcoin's clean and it's safe and it's traceable. That seems to be part of the story. And what's also interesting is, like you're saying, is what's kind of got lost along the way is this expectation of privacy in financial transactions. I mean, we're so used to, or historically, using cash. That used to be a normal thing, and now, it's kind of disappeared, and it's we've kind of reinvented it with cryptocurrency, and Bitcoin's obviously the one that's kind of leading the charge here. And now it's like we have to re-argue as to why we need cash. So it's like it's gotten forgotten. Meanwhile, and we're here calling things like Monero, privacy coins, which is, it's absurd that we even have to call them privacy coins. They should just be called, whatever it is, cryptocurrency.
Make up a name. There's enough names that everybody calls these things.
Right. They are cryptocurrency, and it's just very interesting where we are right now, that we essentially have to argue and work with regulators, and now try to get people to understand why cash is essential and important to begin with, and remind people that it's the normal thing. When you go to a bank traditionally, and you take out $3,000 from the bank, they may say, if you want more than a certain amount, they may say you have to come back. We don't have that much money on hand, but they give you the cash. And once you leave with that cash, you're free to do with it as however you wish. You're not every time you make an expense, you're going back and reporting to the bank, oh, I just used, $10 of the cash to buy this, and I just used $1,000 to buy this. Once you have that cash in hand, you're free to use your cash, and everybody expects that. Anybody would be turned off by the fact that once you have that cash, it's now traceable, and the authority that gave you that cash can now see how you use it. Any normal person would find that repulsive. Yet with cryptocurrency, it's become almost expected that that's what should happen. And that's what we're seeing in the Bitcoin space. And then you have things like Monero that don't allow that and are preserving what cash gave us. So it's very strange to see this happening. And so where do you guys, I feel like we're in this gray area right now. And where do you ultimately see this going? You guys, I feel like, are part of what's becoming the bridge during this, allowing us to move from, non-crypto to the crypto world. You guys are going to be partaking in that by with Comply First, and explaining to these companies what it is that they need to do. What do you see as being the ultimate outcome? Are we going to get to a world hopefully soon where exchanges are using privacy coins just as much as they're using Bitcoin? Are they going to are we going to get there, or is it always going to be Bitcoin and then this other thing, privacy coins, that are looked at as having higher risks, that it won't be as easy to obtain, only certain exchanges are going to use them? What do you guys see as being the ultimate outcome, and is that part of the agenda of Comply First? What is the vision of Comply First? Where are you trying to take us?
Well, I would say there's two things there I want to touch on. First is Comply First believes that, at least in the United States, according to the regulations that are in books right now, look, we can put aside New York because it's a bit more ambiguous. But for the rest of the United States, we feel that it is not in a gray area. We feel that, to a large extent, exchanges have envisioned that these privacy-preserving cryptocurrencies are more in a gray area than they might be, which has deep landed, adoption or addition of these lower on their priority than it might otherwise be. So we have put out resources that explicitly say, like, this should be a path forward for you to be able to provide services and products related to these cryptocurrencies. And so we heavily encourage you to, because of course you have users that do want to not have every transaction be completely broadcast to the public. So there's obviously a strong demand for this. However, I would say when it comes to future regulation, there's really two possible paths forward. So the first is that if regulators are able to notice that adoption of these privacy features is very, very low, it has limited liquidity. All of the liquidity comes from, centralized exchanges that they have adoption or have some control over. They're in the jurisdiction. This is usually the case for small privacy-preserving cryptocurrencies, ones that are listed on, like, let's say, one or two exchanges, and are much smaller. For those, yes, the government could be quite aggressive at trying to shut those things down, and in doing so, they would effectively kill the coin if there's no liquidity for it. You can't use a coin if you can't buy or sell it anywhere, right? But in Monero's case, Monero is a several billion-dollar project, and the transactions are up 3 times as much since they were last year. So it really isn't going away. And I think even though Monero is only listed on one major centralized exchange here in the U.S. And obviously we're doing what we can to improve it. The fact that Monero is less accessible on U.S. regulated exchanges has just pushed people to use less regulated exchanges in foreign jurisdictions. So in doing so, Monero has grown despite limited on and off ramps in the U.S. And since there are limited partners in the U.S. that are actually, doing KYC, AML on customers, it means that regulators may have a change in tone. I do expect them to, assuming Monero continues growing, where the focus will be less on let's prevent people from using these things. It'll be let's do what we can to incentivize people to use these things on our platforms where we have some additional insight to these transactions. Because from a regulator's perspective, they would much rather have people adopting Monero and doing a bunch of transactions on US centralized exchanges than they would if everyone was trading on a DEX or everyone was trading on a different jurisdiction's exchange where they wouldn't share information. Then they really don't have much investigative power to go on. So I do think regulators will change their opinion, assuming Monero continues growing. But you need to get to a sort of point where regulators are saying, they need to signal to exchanges and banks, stop treating this as a higher risk asset that you don't want to touch. We want you to support this asset because we want to be your partner to information share. I think to some extent that'll have to come from regulators to banks in particular, because at the moment, most cryptocurrency exchanges are heavily reliant on the policies of their banks, because if they lose their banking partners, then how are they going to be in business? So it still is very much an indirect relationship. And I think if regulators want additional oversight on what people are doing with cryptocurrencies, particularly privacy-preserving cryptocurrencies, the best way to gather that information is to set up, clear guidelines on how regulated entities can provide those services, and then to actually encourage those services to support these privacy-preserving cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, and I think you made a few good points. I mean, one is I think a lot of people are assuming that exchanges just delist these things, but a lot of it just the pressure comes from banking partners because they are, they're under their own regulations, like the Bank Secrecy Act and things like that, where they have to ensure that they don't have dirty, unless you're HSBC, for instance, they have to ensure that they don't have dirty money flowing around their bank, or money that could potentially be a byproduct of money laundering or some other kind of nefarious activity. So, and a lot of that just comes from ignorance. I mean, there's much less known about these privacy coins, and there's not as much resources out there traditionally. I mean, historically, haven't been a lot of resources out there about these things that are open and kind of aimed towards compliance staff. So that's kind of one of the big things that we're trying to correct here. And I think the other point that Justin hit on, which is really important, is kind of the size of a community, the size of a market for a particular privacy preserving cryptocurrency. So that does matter, and I think you hear it matters a ton. And I think when you talk, you see on Reddit, and there's members of the Monero community, the opinions here are widely spread. And, I think there's people that are really hardcore on the privacy side and, screw the system. We don't want to have to work with those guys. It's definitely a position to consider, considering kind of Monero's origins and things like that. I think we tend to be more in the pragmatic bent where, listen, if you're on a centralized exchange, especially one that handles fiat currencies like the dollar, there are certain rules that those exchanges are regulated. They have to play by those rules, and there's no way around that. And part of those rules are reducing or gaining insight into who their customers are, and in putting in processes and procedures to combat money laundering, terrorist financing, illicit use of funds like child exploitation, and all the examples they normally give. And so I think there's a good reason for those rules, and at the same time, if for a project to be listed on that exchange, there is some level of compliance that it has, and because Monero is a privacy coin, doesn't it doesn't impact the fact that it can be compliant. I mean, these customers on these exchange are identified, and they can be known. So the fact that the coins aren't the things that are made compliant. It's the venues, the exchanges. So the exchange can be a compliant venue as long as they're doing appropriate due diligence on their customers and on maybe they're weird large transactions, odd transactions, different technologies being used. It's at the exchange's responsibility to perform further due diligence there. So, but the thing is that what we're doing is by putting these resources in the hands of exchanges and other virtual asset service providers is kind of enabling them to feel comfortable in offering these cryptocurrencies like Monero. And I think that's really important because that really expands the user base. That's what gets people interested. That's what grows the market cap. As much as people, we all, especially in the Monero community, we're not a ton of speculators that are just calling for the moon. There's a lot of people that have genuine interest in the technology, and I think that's great. That's the core of a really solid cryptocurrency community. I was one of the co-founders of Counterparty, which was an early project, and we had that as well, and that was really the core of that community. But at the same time, like you see a lot of adoption, humans being humans and human nature being what it is. We're greedy people and we're greedy things, and when we see when there's something we're interested in, we want to acquire that and own it. So I think that's part of it, is by allowing people to basically take part financially in a cryptocurrency, they become psychologically invested in the system, and they help to grow the user base, which helps to make the cryptocurrency much more resistant to efforts to shut it down or to break it apart, or just to kind of keep it small and push it over there and sweep it under the rug and ignore it. So I think from a pragmatic perspective, I think that's a big interest, at least of mine personally, is just gaining more actual exchange listings, adoption of this stuff. Yes, sure, the price may go up, but it also, in doing so, it gets people interested in what is this Monero thing, and then people say, how do I get it? It's much easier to get it. And in doing so, maybe, hopefully, people will become more educated in the value of privacy preserving cryptocurrencies. And like we were talking about, that's how Bitcoin is not, in the history of money, it's not a normal thing. And it's nothing we should take for granted. Is just how things will be, because if everything was like that, we would live in a dystopian society. So I think there has to be a degree of privacy. And I think last thing I'll say is, for people interested in that, I think Coin Center wrote an excellent paper about the benefits of peer-to-peer cash. And we have it under the resources, the external resources section of our website. But it's also on Coin Center site, of course, as well.
So you guys gave your first seminar today. Who was on there? Who was watching? Do you guys know? Was it companies that are interested in working with privacy coins? Who is your customer? Who's watching those seminars?
Well, I mean, we do have a pretty strict privacy policy that we don't really share who is watching these things or who signs up.
What are like the types? I was there. I was tuned in.
We didn't know who anyone was. So
yeah. No, we did make sure that there were more anonymous options to join. Now, granted, you do need to use a Microsoft product. So at the end of the day, we're not perfect, but it's people did not need to provide us with their actual, we didn't verify any of the information people provided. But that aside, we definitely targeted the webinar at compliance professionals, people who are working with exchanges. Although, we still wanted the focus to be with regulators. We were in touch with some individuals at FinCEN. And so it was very good news for us that, FinCEN at least heard of our documents the day we made them public. So it meant the word was getting out the way it should have. And that's really credit to, Robby and the rest of the Comply First team there. Targeting compliance professionals, we want them to see the resources, because at the end of the day, they are the ones that are implementing these compliance programs. They're the ones that are going to have to be the ones talking to their bank. If their bank comes to them and says, hey, do you support privacy coins is what they're going to say. Or, hey, do you support this? And they're going to have to be like, yes, and this is why, and this is what we do. Like, and people don't want to do that if they don't have to. So, obviously banks have to come around later, but we're focusing on giving resources first to the people who are regulated and have these compliance programs already implemented. So, but of course, people like, you or anyone else in the wider cryptocurrency community are welcome to watch and figure out what's going on in this side of the world.
Oh yeah, I tuned in today. I'll definitely be tuning into others. So you're probably going to hate this question, but so like Coinbase, right? So we've all been waiting forever for Monero to be added to Coinbase. We saw Zcash got added. I guess it was a few years ago now. Is Grin on Coinbase? I don't even know.
That's a good question. I don't know.
Everything under the sun these days. Monero is peculiarly absent.
Right. I remember they had come up with their reasons for how they add certain coins, and I remember even at that time it seemed like Monero checked every single box. So what is going through the mind of Coinbase? I mean, so they're weighing, obviously. I think if they were to add Monero, you would think they'd be making some money off that, right? Off of the trades and people coming in to buy Monero, right? And then they're weighing that against the risk that they have to take with adding it. I mean, what do you guys see as what's the decision that's being made there, and how is it that they're deciding on not adding Monero to this day, when you have things like the Perkins paper that came out, and Kraken has always carried Monero, and that's a very large established United States exchange. What is the holdup there, and what needs to be done to get them to come over to the dark side?
I mean, I think ultimately, first of all, obviously we can't speak for Coinbase, but I think ultimately they need to want it. It can no longer be we want to support privacy, but this, or we want to support privacy, but the jury's still out. Privacy is happening on Bitcoin, not on the scale it happens on Monero, but Monero is a smaller project too. So, Coinbase needs to deal with challenges with privacy preserving tools on Bitcoin. So they ultimately need to be the ones that are willing to make an argument. And I mean, from our perspective, we don't have insight to their, correspondence they've had with regulators and their banks, but they're pretty well known. And I think if they were more aggressive, I think that would be really good for everyone. I don't know why they're not. They were more aggressive for adding Zcash, although only the transparent form. But Gemini, for example, they support shielded withdrawals and deposits of Zcash. So what's the practical difference between hidden and obfuscated withdrawals and deposits of Monero on a compliant exchange compared to fully shielded transactions on Zcash? There really isn't from a compliance perspective, there's effectively no difference. Compliance professionals don't care about the cryptography. They just care about what are my risks, and the risks are effectively identical. So I don't know. I mean, it needs to take people like Comply First that are out there lowering the bar as far as possible. That's what we're trying to do. But ultimately, at the end of the day, these companies can do whatever they want, and they need pressure from others to get out and do the right thing. And I know Coinbase has had some challenges with that in the past several years, but I'm really hoping that they figure it out soon, like Kraken has, who, just as a reminder, has a banking charter now and has disclosed that they support Monero as part of that. So it certainly is possible to even operate, in some cases in New York, because you don't need a bit license if you have a banking charter. So there you go, put the pieces together. So I do think once someone more aggressive, like Kraken, if Kraken, who's more aggressive, in our opinion, in a correct and sensible way, is always pushing the boundary, then, maybe someone will eventually come around. But you have to give someone a business case too. Like, Coinbase and Gemini have shared investors with Zcash. So there's a bit of a direct incentive to support an asset. It's not, it's unlikely they have that same overlap with Monero. So they're probably less likely to be like outspoken for why they should support these other assets.
So they just haven't acquired enough Monero yet themselves.
That's one way. If you somehow were to just drop off, like park a few Monero somewhere, like that's certainly an option. But like,
it's a Ukrainian kid with a ton of Monero to give him some.
Yeah, like, did that guy really buy it at 50 cents? Like, I don't know. But like, maybe they did. But like, people are like, if you put a financial incentive in someone's pocket, it definitely makes things easier. But it's I don't think it's the only part. I just think they just are relatively apathetic towards it, and they like to talk about the importance of privacy. Like, they talk about importance of privacy, which is why we support Zcash transparent addresses. Like, it doesn't really add up. So
I think there are, like, if you look at of course this could all be talk, but you look at Brian Armstrong's, he did mention on a tweet or something like that hey, I'd like to support Monero, but I don't want to die on this regulatory hill, fighting regulators, which I don't know. You could take that argument. You could, at the time, with kind of comply first, and he said that before this regulatory white paper was out, you may be you could give him the benefit of the doubt there, and you could say, listen, obviously that's not the case, but he didn't know that. But you would assume someone like Coinbase, who has had Ricardo over to present on Monero years ago, would be knowledgeable and would have done due diligence regulatory level about that. And I don't know why they would have seen that they could perfectly offer Monero and stay compliant. Now, maybe there's some kind of PR or just kind of perception things why they didn't. They don't want to have articles written about them saying that they're kind of enabling all sorts of evil people to do it. And those are written out of ignorance as well. But at the same time, that's just kind of where we are. But now we have, this white paper was released, I think, in September, and Comply First came out. I think we publicly released that in early December. So now these resources are out there. So number one, that effort, and those efforts around privacy preserving cryptos in particular, is making it less able to kind of ignore this. And number two, we've mentioned that these privacy technologies are appearing in Bitcoin and Ethereum. They're getting more widespread use. We had an example from Justin did from the webinar where he noted that Samurai Wallet mixing size and transactions were up over 10x over this last year with Bitcoin. So even with Bitcoin, these features are getting more use. You're less likely to kind of keep that old school stance of, Bitcoin and Ethereum, these are compliant and this is great, perfect. But we're just going to leave and kind of ignore these Monero and the Zcash to some extent. We're just going to push these guys over here and ignore them, and we feel safe about being compliant now. So that position is getting just more and more untenable as these resources come out and as time goes on.
So are there, is it potentially more costly to comply with Bitcoin versus Monero? So if you're an exchange and you're accepting Bitcoin, and then there's privacy coins like Monero. With Bitcoin, we have technologies like chain analytics companies that you can implement to follow the chain and track and trace people. With Monero, that doesn't really exist, so you don't have that option. Is it potentially even cheaper for a company, an exchange, to comply with a privacy coin versus something like Bitcoin, because you don't even have those additional tools there to implement, which obviously come with costs?
I would say in theory, but like the uncertainty that comes with swimming upstream a little bit, again, not to a huge extent. Like, let's not kid ourselves. Like, Kraken is still like out there and is a big fish that's already made it up up. But for some reason, the uncertainty is perceived as significant. And so long as it will be perceived as such, people are like, they're just not going to care. There are very few businesses like Cake Wallet that are, doing very well, but also are heavily reliant on Monero revenue. Most are reliant on like Bitcoin and Ethereum revenue, and that's just the way it is. And so, sure, there is some money to be gained from listing Monero, and as Monero continues to grow, I mean that's going to be a more and more compelling argument going forward. No one really sees Monero being one of the few coins that goes away, or one of the coins that goes away in the next like 5 or 10 years. Like people expect out of all the coins, Monero will probably still be around, but the fact is most of the trading volume's on Bitcoin, so all the money's there. So it's easy to just be dismissive of other products sometimes. So I don't know. I do think to some extent we've kind of paved the way. Like we've built like all these compliance programs for Comply First, and to some extent we're just waiting for like a medium-sized exchange just to like swoop in and then just start running with these tools. And they're going to be doing things. I don't want to create the perception that they would be like rash in doing so. Like they're following best practices. They're doing all KML, like KYC AML. They're doing all these compliance things they should, but like they would be filling the void that the larger players are just uncertain about for whatever reason.
Sorry, Justin. I think my personal surprise, I was really surprised that we release these resources. Like Justin said, day one, we had someone way high up in FinCEN, way high up, contact us, very positive about the resources. Real nice guy, real positive about the resources. FinCEN took an immediate interest in this. The regulator, that was the last thing I was expecting. I was expecting we'd have to get a bunch of attention from a bunch of exchanges, and then the regulator would kind of come around and look at this stuff, and we'd have to, kind of make a case and all this other stuff to them. But like we didn't have a Coinbase. Brian Armstrong or one of his people didn't reach out and say, "Wow, great! This is what we need to make the case." So at one end, it was cool that the regulator themselves took in such an immediate interest in this, and another side is kind of like, come on, crypto industry, like short of like Kraken and like the old school Poloniacs that really started carrying Monero out the gate and just really moved this thing forward. Like, what are the rest of these guys doing? Like, we have FinCEN over here, and they're just like, we like the direction this is going in, and what do you guys need? All the resources are here. So I think it's still like, given the benefit of the doubt, it hasn't been that long. It takes these compliance departments and these executives a while to kind of like, they're so busy and maybe they haven't seen it or whatever. But as time goes on, the next month or two or whatever, it gets less likely for them to say that. They have to at some point come take a look at these resources and just say like, okay, this stuff makes sense. It's of course, like we noted, it's not a legal opinion. We're not providing legal opinions. So you can't like say, oh, well, the Comply First guys told me, but at the same time, like you can Perkins Coie weighed in on it. They have very well reasoned logic behind that and references. And you can cross-check any of this stuff we're saying against the extant references, regulatory statutes and things like that, and see that it's legit. So at some point, these guys have to do that.
I think that's a really good point, because it's often what a lot of people think in the Monero community is that FinCEN is just like this like snoopy person in the back, and they're just like doing whatever they can to just kill everything else off, right? And that just, I know I'm not going to change everyone's opinion as a result of this, but that's not really what they're trying to do. Like they do try and weigh the balances about, let's collect information where it's useful for us to have information. And then let's also make sure that innovation still occurs. So when Comply First resources got out there, like, yeah, they are being reviewed by not only just compliance professionals at exchanges, but yes, regulators are looking at them too, right? So I hope this is the case, but if the case is that Comply First continues to be like the first name people think of to call when they have like, oh, we're having this panel on privacy, we need to invite someone, Comply First, right? Or, oh, we want this discussion, Comply First, right? Then all of a sudden now we've made our way into the discussion. And if we're collaborating with FinCEN often, right? Which I don't want to suggest we are at the moment, but if we are, if this relationship builds where our resources continue to be well, respected, then like it's basically us being like, yes, we have these resources, they're pretty good, all the feedback we say is good. The regulators like, yeah, looks all right. They can't endorse it, but they say, yeah, looks okay. And then the crypto exchanges are like, IDK though. Like, I don't know. I don't know. And it's just this, it's weird because these industries, which are on the bleeding edge of they're in an emerging industry that sometimes people perceive as higher risk, right, are so risk averse in some certain things. I think perhaps it just comes from being so defensive about their banking relationships. Like when signing up, they're like, a lot of times it's like, please give me a bank account, please, I'll do anything, right? Is sort of what it's become. And it's remarkable to see how that it makes its way into the way they like approach certain policies and procedures.
I think cracking getting a banking license just will be great. It's great news. I mean, just like the fact that you got some real deal stuff, and I have experience with Silvergate and stuff like that, personal experience, and I think they're a lot more crypto friendly than obviously most banks, and it's great to be able to move money between fiat and crypto and not worry about having your account shut down, because they have a good relationship with their regulator, I think, which is the San Francisco Fed or something like that. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, they're no Kraken, and they don't carry that crypto ethos from the get-go forward, and support Monero. And like Justin noted, we're able to get a banking license base, when that information was right there in the disclosures. So I think that's just a shining endorsement that even at the highest levels, to have a banking license, it is possible to support privacy preserving cryptocurrencies and do so.
So let's talk a little bit more about what would it functionally be like for an exchange. They want to add Monero. They don't have Monero yet, or they want to add some other privacy coin. But let's just talk about Monero. And they do come across these scenarios where I guess a customer is considered more high risk. What is it that these exchanges would be expected to do? And this relates to my previous question, which was, I see like with Bitcoin, I think they could then look to chain analytics companies, right, and implement those tools to do more due diligence and trying to figure out, where coins have come from or where they're going. With Monero, what would the exchange be expected to do at that point? Just ask for more information about the customer?
In general, yes. Keeping in mind that a lot of cryptocurrency exchanges already ask for far more information than is considered the minimum, even for Bitcoin. So in the United States, there are some allowances to not require an ID, for example, for purchases of exchanges of up to $3,000, right? And that varies, whatever. Well, it's not as straightforward as it might appear, but that's technically right. But still, what cryptocurrency exchange in the U.S. could you just buy $100 of crypto without providing any information? Pretty much none, right? So, they already they ask for common, sensible things that they typically ask for people from a KYC onboarding. And so if they feel that is not sufficient enough, they can do a few things. One, they can say, well, for trading in privacy preserving cryptocurrencies, we might initially set your limit as lower. You can only deposit or withdraw up to a lower limit than we'd permit for the same tier for Bitcoin. For example, until we feel comfortable with the relationship. Or it might say, well, tier 1 requires an ID and your address and your social security number. Well, for tier 2, we need to know what your occupation is, and you need to upload a bank statement. Maybe that is, and then they'll be like, okay, we have information. This person clearly has a job and has assets. It's reasonable that they have some money to trade, right? That's another example. Alternatively, they can go other routes. They could say, you can buy Monero on the platform, and you might only be able to deposit or withdraw on other exchanges that support Monero. That's obviously not ideal from a user experience perspective, but at that point, what risk is there with the privacy component of the tool if you're only sending to other regulated exchanges? It's basically irrelevant. So again, not advocating that route, but
you wouldn't be able to send your Monero off to your own wallet. You'd be forced to send it to another.
Right. Like I don't advocate for an exchange to do this, but like theoretically, just in terms of risk mitigation, like there is no substantial incremental risk from an exchange transferring like Bitcoin from Coinbase to Kraken than Monero from Coinbase to Kraken, right? So like in all cases, Kraken and Coinbase know who each other are, and they know information about the customer passed with the travel rule. So nothing is really being obfuscated as a result of them using Monero compared to Bitcoin. So I think to some extent it's useful to break things down on those types of risks. And so I think it's just most likely that someone, I really hope an exchange will just look at their existing tier-based verification system, because almost everyone has a tier-based deal. And they'll just say like, first tier, or they'll like maybe move Monero down like one tier if they really want to be quick about it. Otherwise, like they could justify, Monero potentially still fitting in the existing tiers if they already collect for like enough information. But obviously the exchange needs to make that assessment, and it's probably not worth like dragging their feet out and not supporting it at all compared to like just a quick implementation. Sometimes doing things quickly and then letting quickly and sometimes a little too much initially, but then letting things settle in like a more equilibrium sometimes makes more sense. So it really ends up, whatever the exchange is comfortable with.
And you could see, maybe at first they kind of overshoot a little bit at first because they're less comfortable with this. So the experience could be kind of more difficult than you would want at first, just when the exchange onboards it. And then once they get comfortable with Monero, that kind of what it's about and how it works and who their users that utilize and trade it are and things like that, they may kind of start to relax those things. So we could see that. And then I think the other thing is, Justin mentioned limiting moving it off exchanges. And you may even with crypto as a whole see more of that over the years, unfortunately. I think that, we're starting to see grumblings, especially, from the Treasury Department, about them wanting to kind of restrict that and starting to see that. I think Switzerland with some of their stuff. And so that's not something that will affect just privacy. That's all crypto. But at the same time, if you're doing that, if you're at that level and things have gotten that bad, there's absolutely no reason to not support privacy preserving cryptocurrencies, because they can't. This is another asset you can't get off your exchange. So I certainly hope that things do not get to that point. That would be, it would really be these regulators, whoever implements this and decrees this, really shooting themselves in the foot. Because if you want a better reason to basically say, screw the centralized exchange, let me start using Monero atomic swaps with Bitcoin. Let me start using DEXs. Let me start using this and that and the other thing. You got the best reason right there to do that, and to kind of jump over a little bit more hoops to kind of make use of that technology. So, and I think the other thing that you may see is, we do reference this enhanced due diligence. And so Comply First has one of these questionnaires on the site. And we try to be really nuanced about that. And we also have a case where a user could be requested for their view, when you want to send Monero to an address, be requested for a view key and private spend key images for that. And that, the questionnaire is I think it's a pain for users to fill out, and it's also a pain for compliance staff to review that thing. So hopefully it's not something that's intended to be used quite often, but only in the most you get a case where you think someone needs to have enhanced due diligence conducted, where the amounts are very large. There may be a politically exposed person or whatever. Justin's a compliance professional here, so he can kind of talk to that more than I can. But the other thing is that when you're talking on the technical side, requesting view keys and getting the view key from someone is easy enough, but getting those key images, I got to have the Monero, GUI client, for instance, and I got to issue the key images. I have to issue a command line, and a command in the command line interface is not available through the GUI. And then the regulator needs to be running a full Monero node and have the blockchain downloaded. And then I have to exchange this data with them. They have to bring it in, and they have to import it into create a new wallet for my address and kind of import that data in, and then do like show transactions and view it and parse that data out. So it's a really kind of obtuse process, and it's meant to be difficult. It should be difficult. Doing that should not be, in my view, should not be easy, because it's not meant to be used as an everyday tool. It should be something that is only employed in kind of the most situations where I want to cash out $10 million in Monero or whatever, and I'm not like particularly well known I pass KYC, but I'm maybe not. The exchange has some questions and things like that where, there's really situations like I'm maybe politically exposed or something like that, where there's situations really that would justify that for them to meet their compliance obligations. So it's not something that we should see a lot of.
Yeah, to be very clear, we are absolutely not recommending for a normal onboarding process to say, give us your view key and key images. Hard no for this. It creates a ton of friction, not only just for the Monero users, but it also creates a lot of friction for the exchanges. And frankly, there is never like a traditional onboarding where they're like, we want to see like the entire transaction history that you've ever done for the entire history of this address. Like, it's weird. And it's also not even that effective, to be honest, because it's not like someone's not restricted to addresses like they are restricted to their bank accounts. Like, sure, you can open a bank account anywhere, but you probably don't have hundreds of them. Meanwhile, an illicit actor can easily create hundreds of addresses. So it's just, we don't recommend using it. Like, we made it so that if there, regulators, banks, investigators have questions, they now have tools that ask, like, this is what you should do and why. But this is certainly not something we're recommending as a typical process. It's over compliance, and it also is terrible user experience for the exchange and the user.
Yeah, I mean the other case is that the methods to do that, they're already out there, and they've been in the client in the code for a long time. So there's nothing new here. And also, none of this should ever touch any kind of protocol code. Like, just like with Bitcoin, the idea of a regulator coming to a Monero developer, for instance, and saying, you need to add this stuff into your code, or else, is just absolutely ridiculous. And the regulators know that. They're not idiots. They know that that doesn't work in the era of open source. You start trying that thing, people are going to fork that code faster than you've ever seen. And Monero will survive untouched by you and maintained by fully anonymous contributors. It will be even harder to deal with it. So it is anti-fragile due to the nature of open source. So I don't think anybody's going to try that anytime soon. And certainly, I've been using Monero since 2015. I think Justin's, probably just as long. And I think we're all hardcore users here too. So that's just there's no ever any kind of thought that any of this kind of compliance stuff falls onto any kind of protocol changes or anything like that. This is strictly at the edges with a fiat regulated exchange and helping them get more comfortable with carrying this asset unchanged, not changing it one bit for anybody.
And then the final note is, DEXs are also a thing too, right? People want to use centralized exchanges because they're easy. They can link their bank account. They can go directly to it, but it's not the only option to trade in the assets. And I think regulators are they're knowledgeable of that too, that if you have a large asset where people are willing to actually trade it, go through the effort, there's a high enough demand that people are going to trade it on a DEX. And if it's their only option, people are going to do it.
And those are going to become more user friendly, I'm sure, as we go, right? And things like
I mean, I don't think they'll ever be as user friendly as a centralized exchange, but at a certain point, if there's a demand for asset, people find a way to trade it. It's to some extent.
They have come a long way. I think we had with Counterparty, we had maybe the first working DEX, and it was with Bitcoin block times. You made a trade and it took 40 minutes for the trade to execute and show up. And we were trying to incorporate Bitcoin. It was a horrendous, I think we ended up disabling it, but you could trade Counterparty assets pretty well. And, we had some cool, successful experience of that. And then you had Ether Delta, which kind of an early Ethereum DEX and several others, but it wasn't quite there with those. It never really quite caught on because centralized exchanges were so much easier to work with. But then you see like Uniswap, and it's gotten pretty darn good. I mean, the experience. And so it's like, I think, as somebody looking at this, you have to be like, this is where I kind of some of the reason we rethink this regulatory approach to these privacy coins will change is because this technology is coming along. You have the atomic swaps work with Monero proceeding, and the technology is only getting easier to use. So when you weigh about how easy it's getting to work with this, with kind of jumping on a centralized exchange and jumping through AML KYC hoops and providing identification and getting approval and all this other stuff, especially if you're not conducting transactions with fiat currency, it gets harder and harder to make a case for centralized exchanges. So I think if I was a regulator, I don't know what's going through their mind, and we don't talk to them about this, for instance, but I would take a look at this and I would say, listen, like I think like Justin mentioned, at some point things get big enough and the privacy technologies become as more and more diffuse through the ecosystem. We need to start accommodating these things better and be realistic about their adoption, and while still accomplishing our mandate to prevent money laundering, to prevent terrorist financing, all that stuff. So they think, being pragmatic with it and trying to find an acceptable middle ground for everybody, just facing the sheer fact that this stuff is becoming more and more widespread. And if they don't do that, again, it just chases it underground and it makes it harder and harder. Because if Monero's on a regulated exchange, with the people that exchanging that to US dollars and other cryptocurrencies and trading it, as a regulator or in law enforcement, I get to see those transactions, and I get to see if people are cashing out to dollars. I can catch a lot of bad activity that way, and I think that's a good thing for them. So I think that's the next best thing, short of being able to see everyone's transactions, which will never happen with this. I think I think they hopefully they're seeing that's a really good kind of position to be in, and not to mess that up by farther clamping down on this. So I think that's kind of the pragmatic look at this.
Yes. So do you guys see Comply First evolving into something like a coin center, and becoming maybe more of a lobbyist and talking about what you guys want the regulations to be regarding privacy coins?
I mean, I don't like to think of it as I like to think of it more as just experts who are familiar with compliance and experts who are familiar with the privacy preserving cryptocurrencies and tools themselves, just offering an opinion where needed. Like we're going to continue putting resources out there, and we hope that they're like, the intent is not solely to push something in a direction. The intent is to come together. This is a consensus on what's a reasonable resource. That's ultimately what we're here for. That like we're obviously advocates for privacy preserving cryptocurrencies, just because we think it's unthinkable for everything to be completely transparent. So to some extent, we're going to continue pushing that narrative, but I don't think that's like an outrageous narrative to push. And I also don't think the purpose of Comply First in one word, should be a lobbyist. We're here to make compliance resources, right? So that's what we do first and foremost. I don't know, Robby, if you have a different view on this. We're still new. We're still figuring things out.
Yeah. I would agree with you. I think just to keep it focused on offering just resources, compliance. And Justin, unless you want to go down to DC and hobnob with a bunch of politicians, I don't have any desire to do that.
Yeah, we probably will talk with regulators pretty commonly or pretty regularly, but I don't imagine we're going to speak with politicians frequently. Mm-hmm. Maybe if the opportunity presents itself, if someone comes to us and is like, hey, let us know what your opinion is on this. I mean, maybe. Yeah, but at what point is that us lobbying?
Yeah.
If we're always the ones that are picking up the phone from other people calling us, is that lobbying? I don't know.
And,
Well,
and
do you see
there's
there being a need there? I mean, I certainly do, right? I mean, it's complying is one thing, but and understanding what the regulations are and realizing, all right, Monero's okay. Exchanges, you could list Monero. We've looked at the regulations. If you do these steps, you should be able to list it, and you should be fine, and you'll be able to comply with the current regulations. But the fear is obviously that I guess new regulations will come about. So do you see there being a need for Monero in particular, for privacy coins in particular, to start to have an influence on what the regulations will become?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about the difference in effort in kind of between releasing resources and clarifying already existing regulations and saying that it's in our view at least it's all right, guys, this is possible, versus spinning your wheels and trying to get new regulations written. It's a huge effort difference, and the latter approach I think is definitely certainly important, but comply first. I mean, as it is right now, we're a small outfit. This is people's free time, basically. It's all volunteer. We don't really have funding. I think we have a structure in place where, I think in the future we'll be able to have industry members and have kind of membership fees paid for by those members, and those could go towards expanding resources and employing some part-time or full-time people to do this. But none of it will ever be put towards making Comply First any kind of for-profit venue or anything like that. This is not a for-profit thing. This is just about having a mission to kind of raise awareness that you can offer these cryptocurrencies today. So changing laws, like, I don't know, there's someone this thing gets big enough and there's someone who's sufficiently interested in starting to take that on. And but you already have groups like the Blockchain Association and Coin Center that are already kind of put together to take that on and have those connections. I think what they haven't done is to put together these kind of resources, be this laser focused on privacy tools and privacy preserving cryptocurrencies. And so I think currently that's kind of where we see our spot,
Yeah, I think what you guys are doing is amazing, and you're definitely filling a necessary niche here. And there's a real need. People want their privacy coins and they want to see them on exchanges. Do you think 2021 will be the year of exchanges starting to add Monero? I mean, obviously we have exchanges that have Monero, we have Kraken, but do you think we're going to start to, with everything that's going on and what you guys are doing, do you think the ecosystem is going to bend towards, being more accommodating of privacy coins?
I hope so, but
it depends on if the Monero Marines can spam Brian Armstrong with links to the Comply First website. So it's all on. I'm half joking, but it's yeah. I mean, like Justin said, I hope so. I mean, this information is out there now, and we're getting more and more eyes on it. I mean, we get people joining our Telegram chat who I think are interested, and they were just waiting for basically the information. A lot of these folks where they could just go to their department or their boss or whatever and say, see, we do have a basis for offering these things. So I think especially as kind of the word gets out, like we've said, there's less and less for a reason for these exchanges not to do it.
And to whatever extent we can provide them with a business case to do it, because hey, look, there's all these people that want this feature. That's always a good thing too.
How about, so Zcash obviously is one of the coins you guys are working with, right? Are they interested in, because you have the Z Corp, or the company behind
Electric Coin, yeah.
The electric coin company. They're pretty well funded, at least they used to, right? I assume they still are. Are are they interested in helping fund this initiative? Is that something that's being discussed at all, or?
I mean, so
they
we
would be a good source of funding for helping push Comply First forward.
I mean, we did let them review the resources before we went public with them early December, but they are not one of the main contributors. And to some extent, I think it is useful for Comply First to not be known as like an initiative by a coin company, right? Like ultimately, like my involvement in Comply First is on behalf of DV, which is cryptocurrency OTC desk, and so we're doing what we can to speak with exchanges and bring them a part of it. And obviously, I think we absolutely would love to have more of their involvement, but up to this point, we haven't had a lot of involvement from the ECC.
Okay. What do you guys see as being next steps for Comply First?
And we have an Ethereum compliance brief next. I think maybe making a Zcash technical compliance guide is on the list. I think the Ethereum one should be actually pretty helpful. I think there was at least one large crypto organization that I think said that we like what you guys are doing, but our business is mostly with Ethereum. So, I think that as this thing is, you kind of rope Ethereum more into this effort and talk about the privacy technologies possible on Ethereum and kind of fill that picture in a little bit more. We may get more involved. And so I think that could open up a lot of things. And I think there's a number of issues when you talk about privacy with DEX use. Ethereum has a ton of DEX use, and so I think that it's not, again, like we talked about Bitcoin in mixing, and Ethereum has experimental use of like zero knowledge proofs on it as well, and a lot of that stuff will just continue to grow. But mixing is a thing on Bitcoin and a lot of DEX use on Ethereum, and criminals have in the past moved coins to try to obscure cash flows through different ERC20 tokens, for instance. So Ethereum is not this clean thing that is is totally not an issue in the case that Monero may be an issue. So like some of that logic starts to break down that I think a lot of industry players in the space have used to kind of justify, like, we're fine with Ethereum and Ethereum and Bitcoin and all those EOS and all that other stuff. But Monero, we're not really comfortable with that.
Yeah, so it's hard to say like we're worried about adoption of a privacy feature, but we're totally fine with like users of all these unregistered decentralized exchanges that are like depositing with ties to sanctions and shit. Like it's it breaks down a bit. So it's good that we're having these conversations to get everyone on a little bit closer of the same page with, at the end of the day, it matters more what the users of the asset are doing with it. And so it's why you have your, AML onboardings, why you collect information, why you ask more information. But our next step is to engage further with some of the industry participants that are interested at the moment, that their main focus is on Ethereum, and there's actually a lot of focus on Ethereum related compliance because of all the DEX happenings. And so we want to be able to lend a hand there in the short future. So work on that. And then I think perhaps next is just getting in conversations where we're of use to lend an opinion of the compliance and then privacy knowledgeable individuals, such that like now you no longer need to ask the opinion of like a company about what they think about their coin's opinion, right? Of course they're going to say it's compliant and whatever else, so they'll tell you whatever they want. But when it comes to people that are knowledgeable about both the tech and also have the compliance background and are not approaching you related to a specific coin, and I do say that knowing that I'm on the Monero Talk podcast, but like I don't receive money from Monero, right? That it changes things a little bit, and I think it's more likely that I'm actually very optimistic that we'll get in some conversations pretty quickly and be able to lend a voice from people knowledgeable about Monero who typically like thought of Monero as like a super side fringe thing. Well, now it's people that are super familiar with it and can answer questions very, very competently, and continue moving things forward.
Did you guys see any pushback from the Monero community? I know, the Monero community is very, very purist, kind of, cypherpunk or crypto anarchist in nature. Obviously, once again, like I said, I think what you guys are doing is great, and I think it's necessary, and especially right now at this time. But I can imagine people in the community putting a negative spin on it and being like, well, why are we even thinking about complying? We should just be building tech that's, making complying irrelevant.
I was only labeled as a traitor at least 3 times that I can think of at the top of my head.
Nobody knows me anymore, so it's fine. We're good. Get back to the shadows.
Whatever that meme of
so the blowback was there. There was.
Yeah. So there certainly are some people in the Monero community that are very, very much against exchanges that are regulated, or perhaps not even just about the exchange, but they are very against using exchanges that are regulated. And in their minds, they probably would prefer for everyone to only have the option to trade on a DEX, and therefore that they do so. I understand why people want to trade on a DEX, and those options will remain available, and they are going to be built out. They're currently being built out in several forms on Monero. So they're coming, right? They're going to be around to a greater extent than what we have just with BISC for Monero at the moment. But I don't see these things as directly in opposition like they perhaps do. I like with Monero, if a user onboards with an exchange, it's far more like a relationship between the user and the exchange than it is with Bitcoin, right? With Bitcoin, sure, you have that, but there are externalities that persist. You have the histories that go on forever in either direction, so it gets messy. With Monero, you buy cryptocurrency on an exchange, you justify why you want to buy it perhaps, and then you go out and use it. And now you're not subject to mass surveillance when you're using these coins. So like with the cash example you referred to earlier, it's similar to withdrawing cash out of the ATM. So there are people in the Monero community that say, why bother with any of these things? These people are always going to try and impose additional regulation. They're always going to try and, go against everything Monero stands for. Monero is very much anti any system. And I just personally, I think it gives these individuals a voice and participation in ways that they have not otherwise been able to participate in a system. And I think that's good, but it shouldn't exclude people that are that have a bank account and that are wishing that they have convenient ways of sending money around. Most people at the end of the day just want convenience. So, Comply First is here to help bridge the gap, because ultimately, the idea of everything being in Monero, that being the global reserve currency and everything else like that, and never having to touch USD, that's more of a pipe dream than a reality. And you're going to need a transition period, even if you take that assumption of that pipe dream. So it is useful to give people an option to, buy in and out and do so in a convenient way. Monero is terrible money if it's only accessible by people who are comfortable using DEXs and things, especially in the current form. So there's pushback. I expected pushback. I was a little surprised at how many people that I didn't expect to the people that were less knowledgeable day to day. I assume they would be less caring than they perhaps are. I thought they would just be happy that it would be, us getting closer to putting it on exchanges. And there are probably most people are in that boat, but there are some people that just see anything that requires your ID is like immoral, and we're not going to change those minds.
Yeah, and I think like Justin, I tend to be pragmatist with this. I think nothing that we're doing is preventing people from using a DEX like BISC, or preventing people from exchanging peer-to-peer with other people, Monero, and staying fully within the Monero ecosystem. We've never advocated that. We would never take a position that should somehow be done away with or whatever. That's just ridiculous. I think that this effort is purely focused on regulated venues and helping to convince these regulated venues that, hey, it's okay to carry these privacy preserving cryptos. And I would point to the example of Bitcoin. Like, if Bitcoin itself, we can always look at Bitcoin. Maybe it's not the best example because you can see how it started with an ethos. It was so run over by speculators and all this other stuff that a lot of that was lost. But at the same time, when you see what Bitcoin is, you have to look at it from the other perspective. When you see what Bitcoin is and how radical that idea is, that you have this fully decentralized, autonomous financial currency, this peer-to-peer cash and store of value and all the other things. It's a fact. I think the biggest thing that keeps it from being closed down and shut off and ignored and whatnot, that makes it so anti-fragile, is that growing size of that community, the people using it. And now we have all these institutional people using it and invested with it. And you have big names in that world basically saying, we like Bitcoin, we like this asset. And that makes it even harder for governments to do anything against it, to really shut it down. And so when you talk about Monero, like, sure, you can take that full-on crypto anarchist approach and exchange it and do not touch any regulated exchanges. But 7% whatever of people, they're either not that technically sophisticated, they don't care about privacy that much, or they don't care about technology that much or whatever. They're not going to take that approach. And for them, there's not enough people that would take that approach that would give Monero the kind of critical mass that it needs to be really resilient to efforts against it. And so our big reason about opening this up to these regulated exchanges, it expands market access, it helps the price, it expands the user base. All of those things make it more resistant.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Robby, so you're an old school crypto guy. Have you always been? I know you mentioned you got into Monero, or you've been using it since 2015. Have you always been like a Monero guy at heart? Are you? What's your crypto?
I've always been interested in. Yeah, I mean, I've always been interested in. I got into cryptocurrency in like late 2012, early 2013, and just was an investor in the first ICO, which was Mastercoin, and kind of saw. In my case, I saw the nature of like adding extended functionality, or just what this technology was possible of. So that was an early thing, and they were talking about doing some really neat stuff with this in a decentralized way, and that was really cool. It was less about privacy, but it was about functionality. And so then there were some execution issues with that, and I think we got frustrated enough, and I was one of the guys that started Counterparty, which, we talked about the DEX, and we had the first decentralized bet on a blockchain happened with that platform. I think the 2014 Super Bowl. It was all very early, but now we're seeing a lot of that technology, like Ethereum really came in there and cleaned it up and really started to show the potential of that. But likewise, there was something lost in all of that, and that was a privacy. Like, I'm doing exchanges, and I can see everyone's balance of who's doing these decentralized exchanges or utilizing these smart contracts and whatnot. It was a big hole, a giant hole in the whole thing. And so, like I said, there's this big kind of built up that this is normal, this perception that's been built up. And I think the next step we talk about is kind of saying, like, we can do all this really great stuff, but now let's kind of put privacy back in where it belongs, which is front and center with this whole thing. So I think that's what got me interested. Besides being a Monero, I do own some Monero, of course, and When I first saw it in 2015, I just kept seeing it come up in Bitcoin Talk, and I was like, Monero. I was like, what is this thing? I looked at it, I was like, wow, this is freaking awesome. Like, this is, I think some other guy, Daniel Kim or something, said, like, this is what people thought Bitcoin was when they bought Bitcoin. It's like, this is the optimal, or at least the best approach we have today of like truly pure peer-to-peer cash. It's really kind of Satoshi's vision. So that got me into it and really interested in it. And so I think combining those things together, that's my interest with Comply First, is to really help to shape privacy back into the conversation in a way that impacts people. It touches what they do with the day they try to exchange. It touches the assets that they hold and they can hold and they feel comfortable holding. It affects the businesses and what they offer. So that's my interest.
All right, guys. Thank you for your time. Where can people learn more about Comply First and, continue to follow the project?
Complyfirst.org.
Doesn't get easier than that.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. Greatly appreciated. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, fellas. Have a good one.
Mm-hmm. Bye-bye.
Happy New Year.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode. We release new episodes every week. You can find and subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you have an Alexa device, you can tell it to listen to the latest episode of the Monero Talk podcast. Go to monerotalk.live/subscribe for a full list of places where you can watch and listen. If you want to interact with us, guests, or other podcast listeners, you can follow us on Twitter. And please leave us a review on iTunes. It helps people find the show, and we are always happy to read them. So thanks so much, and we look forward to being back next week.